Sarah, it's long overdue, but I am really excited to be having this conversation with you today. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I think we should start by talking about why we're having this, for hopefully one of many conversations with each other, which is as a congratulations. Congratulations for winning a 2023 Sheikh Saoud
Thank
Thani
you.
Project Award.
Thank you. It's really an honor.
Well,
It is.
we had a really great jury this year, and your work resonated with so many people in the jury, and resonated also because obviously a practice that talks about memory and history and has relationships with archives, both personal and cultural photographic archives, is one of the sort of main threads that you would kind of characterize photography from the region and independent artistic practice in particular. So it's actually, I think it's really interesting when a group of people come together and go, aha, I haven't seen this before. And there was definitely a sense in the discussion about your work that we were really excited to be introduced to your work and to understand better this incredible practice that you have. So I hope that's part of that's the context for my curiosity to talk to you today. Before we look at the work that you brought into the conversation with your application, I wanted to ask you just a couple of questions about your relationship with photography. And we're asking all of the grant awardees this year these questions, which is around really when photography becomes a presence in your life. So the first question is really about when you become sort of conscious of photography in childhood or in early adulthood. So really those, if you have any distinct memories of photography and image making being something that you become conscious of.
Yeah. So like when I was I'd say a kid until maybe like 10 years old, photography was something special in the way that back then we were still using film, like everyone was using film. And so it was something that was not as cheap as today, but not as expensive as also today. But basically it was for special occasions. So, it was something precious, basically. It was something precious, something for, very special events, not something we would do every day like we do today.
Yeah.
And so that was it for until I was maybe 10 or 11. Then I used to watch this show with a very strong female character that was doing investigations, and she was using this very cool DSLR, and she had this telephoto lens. And I was obsessed with that show, and I was like, I want this. And I was harassing my mom to buy me a DSLR at 12, and she was like, no. But I was, it was, I think at this point that I was really becoming interested in it. And I was very lucky because when I was 13, there was a worker in my school. She was a supervisor, and she was an art student, and she set up this workshop for analog photography. So I was 13, and I did it. But this is when this is my first real experience of photography, and I was really young. Now I realize how lucky I was. And so we did the whole thing. She gave me a camera, so I took this one portrait, and I still have it. Of a school friend, and we went and developed the film, and she even I don't even know how she brought this huge enlarger, but we did the whole thing. We even printed it and everything. it was great. I remember this very well. But that was it, because I was the only one interested.
No way.
I don't know. I think it wasn't enough, so we had to stop. But this one experience was really I'd say seminal for me.
Yeah.
Then when I was 17, my dad gave me this digital camera, like a compact small camera. And I started documenting like, people around me. And I think that's when like my practice kind of stabilized and really begun. So yeah.
Would you, and tell me about that, like tell me about the point at which you describe it as a stabilization, but I guess it's also about the point at which the camera becomes this kind of vehicle for your ideas or the way that you interact with the world. Tell me more about what was happening for you at that age.
So like high school was it was a very comfortable time, so much so that I really didn't want to get out of it. I was kind of like sabotaging my exams to not get out of it, but I got, I passed and everything went well. But I think it has something to do with my use of the camera as well. Because I feel like I needed to, to have these moments fixed, because I was enjoying it so much in a way that I didn't want to let go of it really.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, how I really like how I related to the camera at that point. Then later, I feel like it evolved in the sense that it became a way for me to be in places when I didn't necessarily feel comfortable or allowed to be in.
Without a camera, like you wouldn't have gone there without a camera.
Yeah, it gave me an excuse to be there and to do something with my hands, because I always feel like I need to like do something with them.
Right.
So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and this is still like the case now, 10 years later or so.
Yeah.
I still feel like that's my excuse really to be there. Sometimes to talk to people, but just to be there really.
What were you looking at when you were a teenager in terms of photography? Like, how were you accessing a context for what you were doing?
Well, it wasn't really that complicated because I was just photographing the people around me, so like the other students, my group of friends, just really documenting what the edge of like the teenage years are like,
Yes.
before going to college or university, like this kind of like in between.
Yes.
So I didn't have any problem accessing anything. It was all like right in front of me.
But were
But
you
yeah, that's
looking at
what I was interested in.
were you looking at books or magazines, or like what were you seeing by other photographers to sort of understand what it
At
was you
that
were doing?
point, to be honest, what I was looking at was like things like Tumblr, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah,
This
yeah,
is,
yeah.
I feel like it's kind of ridiculous, but these, I mean, the photos that went on there had this kind of like, they had like a particular mood to them. Like oftentimes like quite nostalgic, or like closed spaces and like that kind of thing. I don't
Yeah.
know. But that was like a source of inspiration for me.
Yes.
If
I
that
don't think
makes
that I
sense.
don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I think it's the truth. It's like, I think for all of us, when we look back, those kind of like they are kind of really modest. Like they're kind of like luck almost, like that you stumble across something. And it's that sort of cognitive thing where you're like, oh, this is more than an accident, or something is happening here, and it takes your attention. So I mean, I wouldn't put it in a sort of hierarchy of books are the best, and then there's magazines, and then there's social media. I think it's really flat at that point when you don't have a sort of value system. It's just really, what does it give you, right? And Tumblr, I think, is brilliant at just sort of like, I was talking to a friend yesterday who's a photographer, and we were sort of looking back at a project maybe 10 years ago, which was, you know, a very active moment of even very established photographers who came out of, you know, wet dark rooms, really thinking about the platforms of social media and digital. And we were talking about this word of, I was using the word optimistic. Like, I always found my relationship with that moment 10 years ago was very optimistic. It was like the world's your oyster in terms of what you could possibly do. And my friend was saying, I think for him, it was possibility, the possibilities that opened up at that moment. So, you know, I think Tumblr was a really good place to look at what was possible at that point.
Yeah. And it's not like something that's curated. So, you know, anything goes, right?
Well, it's not curated by a sort of like patriarchal figure.
I mean, like everyone can, you know, share what they want. So there's not like this central entity that would, like, you know,
judge you. Yeah.
Judge what's good and what's not good enough to go on there. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like at that point I didn't have like I mean, I was taking like this this art specialty, but like the artists I was exposed to were mostly you know, street artists or painters, like not really photographers.
Yeah.
And I got introduced to like the history of photography when I was in university. Again, there was like a class I was allowed to take on the history of American photography, you know, beginning in the Civil War and everything. And, you know, that's when my photography education, so to speak, kind of began. Yeah.
I like the way you put it in. In speech. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Because I don't know, like I always feel like being educated in photography is I don't know, it's a debate for me. Like, you know, at some point I wanted to go to there's a school in Paris. It's really famous. I forget the name of it. I mean, I don't know, that's something that I had in my mind, and now looking back, I feel like going to school to learn photography is, I'm not sure, like kind of it's you know, putting 3 or more years of your life in parentheses to study just that. I feel like it's more useful to study something like sociology or something that has to do with, you know, I mean, for me personally, as I'm interested in those topics, rather than just the medium itself. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me that I think that's really clear in your work, and also because your practice isn't limited to photography, right? You're also a filmmaker. And the idea that you might be making decisions, when is it a photographic project and when is it a film? Like, it's much more within that landscape that is true to the 21st century, which is, you can, you know, when I mean, I'm obviously much older than you, but I remember the discussions in the early 21st century when there was this kind of radical sort of axis shift in what this semantic idea or this cultural idea of photography was. And one of the things that I learned at that point was not to be upset when we moved away from the rhetoric of the 20th century, which was all about photography as my voice, and there's this prosthetic of my body, and, you know, this deeply personal and kind of unquestionable relationship with the camera. And then moving into the 21st century, and some of the best practitioners were saying, oh, photography is just a tool. It's just a vehicle for the idea. Like, I don't have that kind of emotional, nostalgic, you know, emotional relationship with the camera. And so I think, so I don't have any issue with you sort of saying, look, declaring the fact that you know, just generationally but also conceptually as an artist, you know, it's not like you've got your your photography club tattoo and you'll never move. So what did you end up studying? What was your main subject?
I studied English and American literature and history, so to speak. I mean, there were other subjects to it, but it's like American studies or English studies in English speaking world. And yes, I mean, it was there were a lot of classes that, you know, included, you know, visual culture. As I said, I had a class on the history of photography.
Yeah.
So it was very broad. That's what I mean. It was very broad. And you know, the main, I guess, I mean, the most important thing was that it had to be in English or had to, you know, relate to the English speaking world, basically. So yeah.
And where were you studying?
I studied in Paris at the Sorbonne, and then after that I did a year in Montreal, where I did study like what they call digital arts, which is really meaningless when I say it like that, but it's also very broad. Yeah, so I did study a bit of art, but I feel like the education in art that I got there was more theoretical. It had more to do with art theory than anything else, really. I mean, it was practical as well, but this is what I learned the most about was the theory.
Can you tell me about, I mean, I know that we're not going to be able to see that today, but I wonder if you could sort of define like the first project and what it was, where you really feel that photography as a tool, as a vehicle, really you begin to define what that means for you. What was your first kind of like attempt where you're like, yeah, that's really me beginning to form the basis of what I'm doing now?
Right. I think the first one was a series I did the day that France won the soccer World Cup.
Yeah.
So that was 2018. Yeah, I would define that as my first one. Luckily it was very limited in time, so like I didn't have to think about like when this starts and when this ends. And yeah, so I was focusing on, I mean, space is really important for me, and the like how you know, immigrants communities or like the diaspora of you know, the African diaspora, basically, broadly speaking, how they were, you know, navigating and like moving through the streets of Paris, because, you know, when France won, you know, I mean, people go to the Champs-Élysées and, you know, the Arc de Triomphe. And these are parts of Paris that are really, you know, usually kind of restricted in a sense to either tourists or, you know, the very wealthy that live there. And so like people coming from the diaspora, they're not usually a presence there. And that day they were. So I was focusing on them mainly. And yeah, I think it gave me like maybe 5 to 10 decent pictures. So that I would consider that like my first project. Before that, it was I wasn't doing any series, so to speak. I was just, you know, shooting whatever at that point. So that was I guess 2017, 2018. I was starting to like travel with my camera. But when I was studying, it was just, you know, going through the streets and just kind of random street photography, basically. And so, yeah, that was my first project when when that victory happened. Then I
mean, that interests me in the sense that, I mean, you're talking about really just, I mean, it's something that I associate with your generation of photographers, which is really claiming these very traditional territories like street photography, but from a position that is clearly politicized and alert to your reading of a situation, whether that's about race or gender. And that, that really intrigues me. Like, that's really, it's a lovely, reassuring revelation to hear that it would be essentially street photography of the World Cup that would be your first.
Yeah, it kind of that. Thank you for summarizing it that way. Yeah, it's just photography of the World Cup. Yeah. Yeah, it was outside basically. There were no like inside shots. So yeah, that would be right.
I mean, it's interesting because it is like something visual, something visually magic really happens when you're using essentially almost like a meme of a celebration of a World Cup. Like there's a gazillion reportage photographs summarizing that match in the epic visual story of a World Cup. But to actually,
you know, when I was earlier saying that, you know, it was the camera was my excuse to be there, that day it really was, because, you know, I didn't know where to watch it, so like I went to Paris, and I mean I was in the area, but you know, I went to like you know, central Paris.
Yes.
I was just hoping to find a place where I could sit, and then, you know, everything was pretty much full. Every restaurant, every place that had a TV. So I stayed outside with the you know, the rest of the people that couldn't get in, and you know, I had my camera. You know, that's what allowed me to be there. Because people were, you know, they were with their friends or whatever. I was just there with my camera, and you know, that was it. Yeah, that was what allowed me to shoot it.
One of my dear friends is a photographer who's older than me. Her name's Connie Samaras, and she's been using kind of critical strategies with photography for a very long time. And one of the things that I learned from Connie, who I think articulated it and kind of like formalized this idea with one of her peers and compadres, Catherine Opie, who's a major photographer here in the US, and is the idea of being a photographer where you use the identity of a photographer as camouflage. I mean, for Connie and for Kathy, we're talking that within the context of being born female and being within queer culture and adopting literally the clothes of a photographer. So for Kathy, when she was starting out, she wore a sort of fedora hat in San Francisco, which was like a kind of interesting, arty, slightly hippie photographer look, right? And then Connie was doing a project which was around surveillance, and so would wear a white t-shirt and chinos and stand in the sort of press kind of enclosure at political events, and so really sort of like represented a press photographer. And this idea, and I think there's something within that which I really learned from, and I think about really the mobility of identifying and as a photographer and using that identity as camouflage in certain situations. And I mean, I'm a little bit upset, you know, after this recorded conversation, I will need to see your World Cup photos, because I think they're fitting into that you're, you know, that nobody noticed you because you were one of many photographers, like surfing on the Champs-Elysees.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, maybe like the people that were like, you know, physically closest to me, like noticed that, you know, it was because it was an analog DSLR. Maybe they thought, oh, that looks old. Like, what is this?
Right.
And maybe like the click of the shutter. Like, I don't know. I have no idea, but you know, I did my pictures. That was, that's what matters in the end.
It's so true, particularly if it's time sensitive. I mean, you've really got one opportunity to explain this.
And like, you know, mine is like really loud. It makes a really loud sound. But you know, I mean, there were a lot of people, and you know, everyone's was focused on the match, and I mean the game, and like, you know, the fact that there was like this, you know, game happening, and like people were like focusing on something else was also very helpful. It's not just me like camouflaging, like it's something really important at stake, and you
Right.
know, it's capturing everyone else's attention. So like I can, you know, take advantage of that and do what I want, basically.
Well, congratulations. We're gonna move on. Before we're gonna look at some images from your project Sandcastles, which is what you brought into the conversation with the Sheikh Thani Awards jurors, which is a remarkable project. But before we look at that, could you tell me what this project is for you and where you're at with it?
Yeah, so this project started as like multi-dimensional questioning when I came back to Algeria after 7 or 8 years, because I was, you know, in France for my studies.
And then
and
where did you
sorry?
come back? Just say where you came back to. Came back to Algeria.
Algeria.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, that was a long time. I didn't come back at all. Like I was working every summer. Like I didn't set foot in there in 8 or 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
So like when I came back, yeah, a lot of things have changed, like really a lot. Even like in the landscape, it was totally different. And so yeah, I mean, I knew that my grandmother was sick, but for me, Alzheimer was just you know, forgetting people that you know and love. And that was it. I mean, that was the worst that could you know, happen when you had that disease. But it was not. It was I mean, I didn't expect it to be that bad. I mean, my grandmother was you know, she wasn't speaking anymore. She
Wow.
wasn't walking. She was in a wheelchair. Uh, and she was doing nothing basically. You know, she was just eating and sleeping. And that was it for her.
Wow.
So there was like this reality. On the other hand, you know, it was a very, you know, special time politically speaking, because everyone was, you know, going out in the streets every Friday and every Tuesday for students. And there was this joy. I mean, everyone was just really happy to be there, and there was like, you know, singing and like
Yeah.
clapping. You know, it was that kind of period in a
So that
country's history, which is, you know,
this
very special.
is this
Yeah.
so this is around 2019, and we're talking the what
Right.
became known as the
Yeah.
Hirak movement.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, even like that summer, the summer of 2019, we also won like the African Cup of Nations, also in football. I have a lot of pictures related to that. And so yeah, I mean, same. It was you know, a lot of joy, a lot happiness. For football is very important for Algerians. So like it was really a great, you know, period to be there.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, there were like these, you know, global so to speak events that were really, you know, joyful and cheerful, and you know, very positive. And in my personal life, I was confronted with my, you know, my grandmother's sickness, and even like in my family there was kind of like a sense of disillusion, even with Hirak and the victory and everything of the African Cup of Nations. So yeah, I mean, it was like the contrast between these two moods that, you know, that I was interested in, as well as something that I noticed pretty early on, which is how I think Algerians in general are very focused. I mean, they put a lot of care in appearances, in making sure that everything looks good and looks presentable. I have like this anecdote that I tell that I think summarizes this well, which is that my grandmother's house, which you see kind of like the ruins of it in the pictures, and it might fall anytime soon. I mean, it's in a really bad shape. So like there's that, and on the other hand, there's my aunt that decided that was a good idea to repaint the living room for guests. And it's a really nice living room, but I mean, it's staying on very fragile basis.
Right.
That summarizes I think the idea pretty well. But yeah, this is how it started.
Should we look at, do you want to share screen and
Sure, yeah.
show us some of the pictures? And that's a really interesting prelude to looking at the pictures.
So yeah, so this is the courtyard in my grandmother's house. I think I took this picture because I saw like this broken door and the empty cage, and it kind of made me think of some kind of flight or escape. And you have the satellite dish as well, which is also a form of escapism.
Yeah.
And so it all looks almost abandoned, but you have the clothes that are show you that this is still inhabited.
Yes,
so
functional as well. Yeah.
So like you have this, and also the broken door I thought was a good metaphor for like breaking into something, and I felt like in a sense I was kind of doing that with my camera. It's like, I mean, yeah, it's kind of like when tourists go to a place, and like a very small like local kind of place, and they start like taking pictures. I mean, it's for some people it's not that acceptable. I mean, my family didn't have any problem with that, I think, but I kind of felt like that tourist. And so like the broken door just made me think of that, the idea of like breaking into something.
Yeah.
And yeah, and on the other hand, you have like the cage and the satellite dish. So it's like this kind of like opposites that I thought was interesting.
I mean, it's also true about just getting into the vibe of where are you within this, because as you said, it's like it was a number of years and a whole range of experiences, both intellectual and personal, that you'd had, and then you're coming back to this place. And maybe that's one of the things that I found I was responding to, is the fact that I trust that there's that acknowledgement in the work of where you are within this at that particular moment. So there's an additional step. I'm just really grateful for you to explain that in this one picture, because I think it's very present in the work and it needs to be acknowledged. It's not you just getting up and photographing what's right in front of you. It's you returning and really looking at what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, it really allowed me to see things in a new light. Kind of intended. Yeah, this is something I was thinking about like recently, how the idea of like being I mean, doing work from within versus from without. And at that point, I think that was from without, but it was me trying to get in and to do work from within. So now I'm doing it from within, but I'm still not sure. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm kind of say doing it from from outside. I don't know. It's like it's not easy to like navigate this within without opposition. But I feel like now I'm more like, you know, seeing things from you know, this within perspective, if I can call it that way. So yeah, maybe we should move on to the next one.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this is my grandmother, who was, I think, sleeping at that time. She was this was probably her afternoon nap. I don't have that much to say about this picture. I think I was thinking about, can she still dream? Like, this is a question that I was that, you know, I was wondering like many times. I did a bit of research on this because, you know, I like researching things. And, you know, they say that they have like a very agitated sleep generally, people that have Alzheimer. And she did seem, you know, kind of restless, but I'm not sure. I mean, even I don't know, even if she was like sleeping, I mean, I wasn't even sure if she was really sleeping, to be honest. Like, it's something, I mean, I was just looking at her a lot and I wasn't sure what was going on. I was just trying to figure it out. And I don't know, I feel like the picture turned out kind of like dreamy.
Yes.
And yeah, I feel like it's like the, you know, the idea of the picture well. But I mean, I don't have like a very elaborate idea on this. I was
No,
just,
don't worry. I mean, you've given so much, and I think that, I mean, in terms of the way that I looked at it, is that you barely notice the figure. You know, that there's something very slight, almost like an apparition, and that's, and also that the photograph, because of all of the grain and the dirt and the soft focus.
Because, you know, I mean, I think it, you know, participates in the kind of like dreaminess of it. And yeah, I think maybe like the posture she's in as well, it kind of captured my attention, because she was never like sleeping straight.
Yeah.
She was always like kind of having like these fetal positions, like the pillow was hardly ever used.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Thank you.
Okay, so this is, so I don't know if I went into details in what I sent you, but so like my grandmother's house was adjacent to a warehouse. So like there's an interesting history to this warehouse, because during colonization, so like this was a French house during colonization. This warehouse was where workers, who were mostly Arabs, were receiving fruits and vegetables, because this was a fairly agricultural area.
Right.
And they were like, you know, putting them in boxes and that kind of thing before they went into markets and that kind of places. And so, yeah, so this is what's left of it now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's in a pretty bad state, and you know, every time it rains here, and like when it rains, it rains, you know, a bit of it just like goes down. So that's why you see like the tiles just collapsing.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so you have the collapse, and you have the you know, the nature taking its right. I don't know if it's the same expression in English, but yeah, basically just things regrowing. And I thought again that there was this interesting opposition between, you know, not dying, but like going down and going up.
Yes. At what point?
Yeah.
At what point in, I mean, let's carry on going, but at what point in the process do you think because I think of Iraq as this kind, I mean, it's ongoing, but it's also this rapid sort of peaks and troughs of optimism and then just despondency and destruction. And I mean, that's me projecting onto the work, but is that okay? Is that part of what is going on in the work for you, that bigger context?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's no, I mean, I think even like because for me, when I thought about that, I thought about it more in a space not special spatial way, yeah,
Right.
related to space.
Yeah.
Because I thought that, you know, people living in Algiers were more involved in it than people outside of it. And just for the context, so like my grandmother's house is, and like basically my family is right outside of Algiers as like an area.
Yeah.
So we're on the kind of like fringe between
Yeah.
Algiers and Tipaza. And so like, yeah, when you get out of Algiers, you know, you kind of see less interest. And I mean, I don't know if that's something you know, that could be generalized, or it's just something that I felt was the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like the further you went from big cities, not just Algiers, but I guess it's the same for other big cities, the less interest you got in that. I'm not sure for the reasons. Like, I mean, I thought about it, but I'm not sure why big cities are more politicized than like the suburbs, if you can call it that. But yeah, for me, it was more like a question of space. But then I think you're right in saying that it's also a question of time. Like, even like people in Algiers here, there were, you know, very, very involved in the first few months, and then, you know, you see like less interest, and then something happens, and you know,
Yeah.
it's not going to be like as intense as in the beginning,
Yeah.
but you will, you know, I don't know, if I take an example for you know, political prisoners, you will see like you know, people sharing things and like saying, oh, you know, the trial for this person is happening, you know, in a week or something. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. And I think also, I think what I'm responding to is your choice of using black and white photography and sort of very analog looking photography, to the point where
It is.
yeah, exactly right. So it's but it's you keep that quality of it, like you make it really pronounced in these photographs.
Yeah.
That it sort of reminds me of you know, early war photography from the 19th century, when obviously you're dealing with slow cameras and this sense, I mean, like I think of like Roger Fenton's photographs of the Crimea, there's a lot of waiting around, like, you know, it's not all action shots. In fact, that's probably a tiny percentage of the realities of periods of conflict or change, right? And a lot of it is super slow, almost glacially slow, or you know, slow like the you know, the falling apart of a building, or slow like nature taking over a space. So I you know, I think it in many ways it is a sort of like almost like a psychic context of what I was reading into the fact that I knew that these photographs, and you described in your artist statement this moment that's very personal. It is about what was happening, returning, and your grandmother's ill health and decline, but it's also within a context of sort of very heightened peaks of optimism for political and social change in Algeria, but then also there's this reality of how that plays out. It's the stamina of it as well, isn't it? It's the sort of endurance kind of feeling of periods of change.
Yeah, and you know, I was trying to you know, deal with this contradiction this is, really how the project started. And I mean, recently I've discovered the work of Donna Haraway, which is an eco-feminist thinker. And she speaks about how, given the context we're in, whether it be environmental, economic, social, etc. We should learn to like try to inhabit ruins, and that means going with practice of like care and and trying to find solutions, but not necessarily, and trying to deal with these contradictions without expecting to be, without expecting for there to be like an answer or a solution that will fix things, and I don't know, I find this idea of inhabiting ruins and like trying to live with them and not get out of them interesting.
Yeah, that's great.
Should I go through?
Yeah, carry on, and maybe start telling us about like where you're at with the project and what you hope to do next.
Okay. Yeah, so this is more on the political side of the project. So you have this man who's just hunched over his phone. I didn't know at first that he was looking at his phone, because when I first printed this, it was not a great place, and the pictures were they were a lot darker than like now, and so it was just like this shadow humped on whatever. I didn't know it was his phone, but I thought like just the shape of his position was kind of telling in a way.
Yeah.
So you have tags. So the tag on the left right corner, un seul héros le peuple, one hero of the people, is a famous slogan of the independence war. So like you can find this slogan in 1960, in 1970. It's been around for a long time. Yeah. So it's kind of like a symbol of independence. And then you have this tag in the middle, which is not super clear, but it reads "You never give up." And I thought that was an interesting juxtaposition between like this kind of like historical slogan, this idea of endurance, like you said, and this man that at first for me looked really tired. Now he's just hunched over his phone. I don't know, at first I didn't know that, so I thought it was complementing the tag really nicely.
It does.
Yeah, and so yeah, moving on to the next one. This is a picture of the victory that I mentioned earlier, the African Cup of Nations. So like this is when the people were waiting for the team to arrive, so it was very joyful, as I think it shows. A lot of music, a lot of dancing, a lot of chanting, whatever. So yeah, this isn't something you see nowadays. That's why I thought it was. A lot of pictures were taken for sure, but I don't know. I feel like I had to immortalize this. I didn't know if it was going to be in the project because I wasn't sure what were the boundaries of the project. I wasn't sure if it was a really good idea to like mix something that was global or collective with something that was more personal. But yeah, I ended up putting it in. And yeah, maybe I should like tell you where I'm at now. So I was kind of like not sure I was going to continue the project after my grandmother's passing, because I mean, I don't know if when she passed, like, you know, the hair was kind of like dead at that point. I mean, it was in the midst of COVID-19, so I just left it where it was, and I don't know, I stopped thinking about it. And then my mother was diagnosed as well. So it was my grandmother passed in the summer of 2020, and my mother was beginning to show really clear signs in the fall or winter of 2020 to 2021. So I took my camera again, and it wasn't necessarily to like continue this project, but I thought like I had to do it. And thinking about it now, or even then maybe, I don't know, I feel like it was you know, I had to like take pictures of my mother in the stages that I had missed with my grandmother.
Wow.
Because I had I mean, when I came back, I had no idea how she went to, you know, null to that sick. And, you know, I was thinking I had to do this just to like, you know, keep in mind the stages before, you know, the kind of like last ones and the worst ones. And I feel like that was important because you tend to forget. Even now, like, today I was trying to like remember what like a normal conversation would be like, and I realized I couldn't quite remember that. Like I could remember like her voice or something like that, but I couldn't remember what we used to talk about, like these things, like really basic normal things.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so now I'm taking mostly pictures of my mom. And I'm still working on like the environments we're in, but it's mostly her, like the kind of like global collective aspect of the project. I'm just not sure what I could, you know, what I could say about it now. And this is maybe like where I'm struggling with it a bit. So yeah, this is where I'm at with it now.
Thank you so much for being so honest about it. I mean, from the outside, I mean, I really look forward to discussing more and sort of helping you work that out. But it feels very natural that it would be you really interrogating the idea of where am I within this? And that includes within a broader context, which is less visibly collective. And, you know, we're coming out of a pandemic, and there's so many other sort of internalized connections that have developed in the time since you started this project. One of the things that I really respond to, which I think is both that in a way it's related to this claiming of this territory of documentary projects and street photography and the genres, the sort of analog histories of photography, and why you might be doing that is there's just a very simple capacity of photography to sort of respond to your urgent need to keep hold of something. And that feels really present, like that's clearly a through line for this project.
Yeah, and you know, there's another aspect that I kind of like realized recently very concretely and very clearly, is that my grandmother was, you know, she was an adult during colonialism. I mean, a young adult, but an adult still.
Yes.
During colonialism and the war, and then she, you know, she lived through everything else, and you know, I feel like she was kind of like a symbol of that period of our history. She really, you know, I mean, she used to embody it. I mean, even when I was little, she was, you know, wearing the traditional haik, like the, you know, the costume. I don't know how to say that, but like what women used to wear basically.
Yeah.
And now it's very rare. Like you rarely see this in the streets. So like even when I was little, she was this symbol of Algeria and of our tradition and history. And so yeah, I mean, I think like her sickness and her death is symptomatic of a larger kind of like generational you know, transformation or like transition. Like the generation that lived that war is dying, and so are the memories, and so are, you know, the stories. And I think you're right. That's me trying to like have a hold on this and like not letting it go. And you know, I feel like the younger generations care less than people that are my age and older. And maybe that's also why I want to keep you know, hold of this.
Thank you so much. I have one final question for you, which is, you know, Taswir is a very young bunny in the photo landscape, and the Sheikh Saoud Thani Grant Award, the Grant Award has been really important. We've always described it as the heart and soul of what Taswir is and what it needs to be. But we're still learning about really what the possibilities are for a festival format to really support photographers regionally. And I wonder if you could, if there was any advice you would give us in terms of what we should challenge ourselves with in the coming years.
I can try. I haven't been to the festival, so I don't know what you're already doing. But like I think having like master classes and like workshops, both for photographers and the general public, is great. I mean, I as a photographer, like I don't feel like I know really necessarily what I'm doing. And, you know, having like these workshops and, you know, learning from like people who, you know, have, you know, years and years and years behind them doing this, would be like a great thing.
Yeah.
And having like, yeah, conversations with the, you know, the larger public, you know, I mean, it's not just photographers should be educated in photography, right? It's something that
absolutely
everyone should have like some kind of understanding. So yeah. And I don't know, like maybe screenings of, you know, documentaries on photography or on famous photographers, having, you know, talks. And I thought maybe like a podcast. I'm listening to like this podcast which is called Visions, but it's in French. And it's, you know, I mean, it's a good thing to have. And yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's not easy to find like conversations around photography. You know, it's not like film, like there's a lot of things on film and like on cinema, but like photography is more of a niche in the art world. So yeah, I think opening up the conversation would be good.
Well, I can't thank you enough for creating one of these conversations with me. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you and to listen to you, and I really look forward to seeing how this project, how Sandcastles develops in the coming years. It's a remarkable project.
Thank you. It really means a lot to me.